This is the story about how I got Bugsy. You wanna go lay down? Okay, go. I honestly don't remember everything. I will do my best to tell you everything that I can. So when this all began, I was living in my own apartment by myself. I thought I was managing pretty well, and things just kept going downhill. And eventually I got to a point where I was suicidal, very seriously suicidal. I was at that point in my life, I was in so much physical pain. I wanted to give up. I didn't care. I just wanted to end it. So I called the suicide hotline, and long story short, they never showed up. As I've mentioned in a few of my past videos, I live in the absolute middle of nowhere. The nearest hospital was like 4 towns over and about a 20-minute drive on the highway. They couldn't find my apartment. I was going to kill myself that night, and I ended up, calling home, and my parents came and got me immediately, just moved me back home like instantaneously. And I started to recover from there. I got to thinking, like, what could make life worth living again? Not to sound morbid, but I mean, realistically, that's where I was at that time in my life. And at that point, I had just about every medication, treatment, injection, you name it. I had everything they could possibly do to treat my pain, and nothing had worked. I was exhausted. And one thing that I noticed when I was in my apartment, even though it was a very short period of time, was that I had my bird with me, and he really helped. As ridiculous as that sounds, and as much as people hate on ESAs, he made me feel better. Not only did he make me feel better, but he forced me to get up in the morning to feed him, to change his water, and to interact with him. And I was just thinking, well, that was the first time in my life I'd ever lived without dogs, aside from being in my dorm room in college. And I was just thinking, how much better my life is with a dog. Like, overnight, it was like a switch flipped. And I just became obsessed with the concept of having a service dog to help me get through life. And at that point, I didn't really know much about the differences between ESAs, therapy dogs, service dogs. I knew the difference between therapy dog and service dog, but at the time I didn't fully understand that the service dog did more than just making you feel better. I mean, I knew obviously guide dogs and mobility dogs had very specific tasks, but I was kind of at that point of the concept of like, oh, if I get a dog, he'll make me feel better. I wasn't even thinking about taking the dog with me places at that time. It was really just a matter of I have to be living with a dog, because I realized that was such a crucial part of my life. And so I moved back home with my parents, and I just honestly threw myself into like a raging fit of research for a few months. I kind of brought it up to my parents, and they weren't against it, but they weren't like, they were kind of like, oh, this is probably just a phase kind of thing. And I got obsessive over it, like absolutely obsessive. And I think I did so much research, and I eventually learned the truth about, the dogs needing to be able to do tasks to mitigate the disability. And my parents kind of were shockingly okay with it. I mean, I don't think any of us really knew what we were doing at the time. They just kind of said, okay, look more into it and we'll see what we can do. So I started looking at a bunch of programs, specifically like, Canine Companions for Independence and a bunch of others. And I realized I kind of got heartbroken actually, because many of the programs out there will deny you if you have any other pets at all. So that was a big issue. And the other issue was that I am an individual who needed a PTSD service dog that was not a veteran. And it's nearly impossible to find a program that will train a dog to perform PTSD tasks for someone who is not a veteran. So I would say we spent a bunch of months looking into various programs and organizations, and we just kind of gave up. And eventually I moved on to the concept of owner training a service dog. I didn't know that much about the service dog aspect of training your own service dog, but I'd always been exceptionally good at training my dogs, even when I was a little girl. And I figured, if we could find the right dog to form the right bond with me that has the capabilities and the temperament of performing the tasks I need, I figured, maybe I could do this. It was almost like the whole family, we just kind of like jumped off a ledge and we're like, yeah, we're gonna wing this and see what happens. We were desperate. Not only was I, but my parents were desperate. They really didn't know how else they could possibly help me. So So we started looking at shelters and rescues and just trying to find a dog that had a suitable temperament. I remember we looked for so long. We searched for months and months. Every shelter, every rescue, nearby, even out of state, reasonably so, and we couldn't find anything. And I just remember that day that it officially hit me. I kind of just flopped on the couch and pathetically sobbed to myself like all day. It was not my finest moment. But I just kind of moped around for a while and watched some Netflix. And my mom was just looking online. It was on Uncle Henry's, which is like the main New England ghetto version of Craigslist. We saw an ad for Bugsy. That is, in fact, a pretty sketchy place to find a dog, especially a dog for service work. And my mom was just kind of go for it, pretty much, is what she said, which I was kind of surprised about. And she just looked at me, she's like, let's give it a shot. I don't think any of us, me or my parents, expected anything to come from this. I was preparing myself for the fact that, maybe the dog had already been adopted and the ad just hadn't been removed yet. So I called the phone number and I was terrified. Like I said before, we live in the absolute middle of nowhere. We couldn't even get internet or TV for like 10 years because the cable companies literally did not come out to where we live. And we couldn't get satellite because our pine trees were too tall and we couldn't safely cut them down. So if that doesn't tell you how far out in the middle of nowhere we live, then nothing will. Anyway, the really strange thing about this was that it turns out Bugsy's breeder and Bugsy at the time literally lived right down the road from us. Like literally lived about 20 to 30 seconds down the road from us. I'm never one to say things like it was meant to be or it was fate. I usually don't think that way, but whether it was or not, it was pretty ridiculously coincidental. Now, I don't remember if this was mentioned specifically in his ad or if Bugsy's breeder said this to one of my parents when we went to meet him, but she said something along the lines of that she really wanted him to be adopted out to a home where he could do something like therapy dog work or service work. We went to meet them. We went to meet the breeder, her family, and all their dogs and Bugsy. And I fell in love immediately. We filled out the paperwork, my parents signed a check, and we brought him home that very day. And that was one of the best days of my life. Now, another thing I want to mention, I don't remember if I said this already. At the time, Bugsy was only intended to become a PTSD service dog. We had absolutely no clue about the seizures, about me passing out. We had no idea that my mobility issues would become as bad as they have. The fact that not only was he able to step up and do the job that I intended for him to do at the time, but that he was actually able to go above and beyond that is pretty incredible. He just does everything for me. And I would do everything for him. Now, I know I sound like I'm about to cry right now. I can hear it in my own voice, but I'm not actually. I'm just crazy, super duper nauseous right now, and I'm trying to hold in everything. Part of the reason I think this was even more special for me was because this was my first service dog. Bugsy is and always will be my first service dog, regardless of whether or not I need another in the future when the time comes, whatever happens. But I think in some ways he will always be most special to me because of that. He gave me my life back, and even though he didn't know it at the time, he has been my little knight in shining armor who is snoring over there on the futon. Bugsy, come here. Yeah, you. Come here. Hi, buddy. How you doing? Up. That was pathetic. I really don't know what I would do without this little guy. I love you so much. And I could not possibly thank his breeder and their family enough for giving him to me. I kind of want to say her name, but I'm not sure if I should. I don't know if she'd be comfortable with that being out there. But she's definitely a big part of why I've gotten my life back. And I think that... Are you falling asleep on me? I don't remember everything. I'm sure I left out a few aspects of our story, and obviously I just, you know, get kind of emotional when talking about my little buggers because I love him. It's kind of funny because just before I got him was one of the lowest points of my life. Definitely one of the hardest parts of my life that I've ever had to go through, and at the same time it was also one of the best. I can't imagine not having him by my side. This may be the traumatic brain injury and my memory loss speaking, but I can't remember what life was like without him. And in a weird way, I'm not really sure I want to. You know, obviously I would love to not be disabled, but if I have to be, I wouldn't want it to be with anybody else by my side. What? Really? You just burp in my ear. I love you. No matter how disgusting you are. Please, give me a high five. Okay. Go make yourself dinner.